Hello and welcome to the Tyndale House podcast. I'm Francie Corns. I'm the Communications Officer here at Tyndale House, and I'm joined again by Tony, who is the Fellow for Public Engagement at Tyndale House, and Peter Williams, who is the Principal of Tyndale House. And we're continuing looking at the book of Micah, trying to make sense of it and get some helpful tips of how we read prophetic books. In our last episode, Tony talked about 3 key areas that are helpful to think about as we approach the text. So the first one was background. We talked a bit about how you can look at sort of the starting verses, often give you some helpful pointers of where to look earlier in the Old Testament. The second one was looking at the text, just reading the text, which we're going to do today. And then the third one was the audience, both the audience Micah was writing and speaking to, and then the audience today, which we're also going to try and cover today. So the text we were going to look at today was chapter 6.
Yeah, it's a good example for us to look through, I think. And I think the key principle is just to read the text really, really closely, more carefully than we tend to do. I think so much of our Bible reading, so much of my Bible reading, when I'm not thinking about what I'm doing carefully enough, I just read too quickly, and I don't spend long enough. And we've had so many conversations with people who say, I'm just not getting anything out of the Bible at the moment. But they're reading for 5 minutes and then assuming that they're going to understand everything. And as we were saying in the last episode, the prophets are a bit harder than some of the other texts, but the rewards, if you really pay careful attention, but we have to slow right down and read really carefully. So it's what we're talking about is a close reading of the text to look in detail at what's going on, because then we can begin to tease through all of this thicket of stuff that looks impenetrable to start with and realize, actually, I can see what's going on here. So we talked last time at a big level about the 3 major sections of Micah, beginning at chapter 1, verse 2, 3, verse 1, and 6, verse 1. 3 sections of oracles, all beginning with here, that start with judgment and end with hope. So that's the big structure of the book. But then we need to then focus in on what are the sections within that. So we're going to look at chapter 6, which is the first major section within the last third of the book, the last of those three major sections. So we need to look at it closely. We'll need to think about what the overall sense of that chapter is. Read through the whole chapter first, get a feel of the thing, and then how do the sentences fit together to build up the flow of the argument and the units within chapter 6? What are the images that are at work here? Are there things that are being repeated, or are there related ideas? Those are the kinds of things that we'll be talking about.
Okay. Great. So I'll just read the whole of chapter 6.
That'd be great.
Hear what the Lord says. Arise, plead your case before the mountains, and let the hills hear your voice. Hear, you mountains, the indictment of the Lord, and you enduring foundations of the earth, for the Lord has an indictment against his people, and he will contend with Israel. O my people, what have I done to you? How have I wearied you? Answer me. For I brought you up from the land of Egypt and redeemed you from the house of slavery. And I sent before you Moses, Aaron, and Miriam. O my people, remember what Balak, king of Moab, devised, and what Balaam, the son of Beor, answered him, and what happened from Shittim to Gilgal, that you may know the righteous acts of the Lord. With what shall I come before the Lord and bow myself before God on high? Shall I come before him with burnt offerings, with calves a year old? Will the Lord be pleased with thousands of rams, with 10,000s of rivers of oil? Shall I give my firstborn for my transgression, the fruit of my body for the sin of my soul? He has told you, O man, what is good. And what does the Lord require of you but to do justice, and to love kindness, and to walk humbly with your God? The voice of the Lord cries to the city, and it is sound wisdom to fear your name. Hear of the rod and of him who appointed it. Can I forget any longer the treasures of wickedness in the house of the wicked, and the scant measure that is accursed? Shall I acquit the man with wicked scales and with a bag of deceitful weights? Your rich men are full of violence, your inhabitants speak lies, and their tongue is deceitful in their mouth. Therefore I strike you with a grievous blow, making you desolate because of your sins. You shall eat, but not be satisfied, and there shall be hunger within you. You shall put away, but not preserve, and what you preserve I will give to the sword. You shall sow, but not reap. You shall tread olives, but not anoint yourselves with oil. You shall tread grapes, but not drink wine. For you have kept the statutes of Omri, and all the works of the house of Ahab, and you have walked in their counsels, that I may make you a desolation, and your inhabitants a hissing. So you shall bear the scorn of my people. Sorry if I mispronounced some names there.
No, that was fine. It's a great passage, isn't it?
It is. So, Tony, what do you make of it?
Well, we have one of the classic kinds of judgment oracles that the prophets like to use. So I've got a CSB open here in front of me, and it's given the heading God's
Christian
lawsuit.
Standard Bible, yep.
Christian Standard Bible, thank you very much. Yep, God's lawsuit against Judah. Has the CSB got a similar?
I've got the English Standard version here.
Yep.
The indictment of the Lord. Yep.
Okay, so but one of the things that's often talked about with prophetic literature is a covenant lawsuit. So it's kind of a court setting, and the prophets are setting it up like a court. God is the judge, bringing a case against his people. So first you've got this command to pay attention, listen to hear what the Lord is saying. Rise, plead your case before the mountains. So that gives you that sense of pleading your case. That gives you the feel that this is one of these covenant lawsuit kind of settings. So think court setting in your mind.
But in that, nowadays we have defense lawyers, we have prosecution lawyers, you have a judge, you can have jury, you have all these different participants. They don't have that many there. I mean, it looks like we just got 3 groups. So even when we say lawsuit, you've got to think yourself into the culture of their own legal setting. As far as I can see, there's just Israel, God, and the mountains.
Yes, that's right.
Right.
Yeah, God is both prosecutor and judge.
Yes. So what are the mountains doing?
Well, let's have a look and see. Plead your case before the mountains. Let the hills hear your complaint. Listen to the Lord's lawsuit, you mountains. So they're the ones who are the witnesses,
because they've been around for a while.
They have indeed been around for a while. So we've got this call for witnesses: the mountains, the hills, and the earth's foundations, you enduring foundations of the earth. These are the ones who are to hear the case. They are to be the witness, because yet they have been around forever, enduring foundations of the earth. So if you think of the history of Israel and the part that mountains have played in it, so they're liberated from Egypt. Where did they meet God? They meet him at the mountain of God, Sinai, Horeb. They come into the land, that hill country of Judea, the spine up the center of Israel is where Jerusalem is. And so much stuff has happened on those hills. The good stuff, the founding of Jerusalem, the building of the temple, a lot of bad stuff too. The idolatry in the high places on top of the hills, all these kinds of things. So these mountains have seen it all. They've seen the people meet with, or Sinai saw the people meet with God there. He hosted, if you can think of Sinai as he hosting God, coming down while the people are gathered at the bottom. He saw all of that giving of the covenant, and then the mountains in Judah and Israel have seen the people's faithfulness, their goodness, their obedience, and their unfaithfulness, their evil, and their complete waywardness. And so the Lord can say to the mountains, so tell me what's been going on here.
So obviously that's a personification of the mountains, which is probably the sort of thing we do in our culture. I just can't think of particular examples where we're doing that. But we might say, Wembley Stadium has witnessed all of these different things.
Exactly.
But it's giving them this role because there aren't. Well, no humans have been around for all of this time. But if you could imagine that they were personal, what stories could they tell? Well, Israel pleading to them saying, we're innocent. No way. There's just no way you can get away persuading a jury of mountains and hills that you're okay. And so it's quite dramatic way, but logically irrefutable, in terms of, and I think that's an image really to enjoy. We could be slightly put off by the fact, hero mountains, well, what's going on here? But if you just think yourself into it, I would say that it's not using humor lightly. It's making a very serious, point. But yes, Israel is absolutely going to stand condemned. And do you see that sort of image maybe lasting down to about verse 5 or so? Is that where it is, and then it's going on to do something different? Or
I think the summoning the witnesses, the mountains and the foundations of the earth being the witnesses, is probably just verses 1 and 2.
1 and 2, and then we're going to slightly move on from that, which is the sort of way things work in a prophet, that you use a particular dramatic image and then you move on to another one.
So the end of verse 2, they are to listen because Yahweh has an accusation against his people and against Israel, and he will be proved right. The Hebrew word there, yachach, it can be rebuke or contend or decide or judge or convict. So it's one of those words that can be translated in quite a number of different ways. But I think he will be proved right, is the way I would go. But you'll see different variations in the different translations because there is that flexibility in the word there. But the point is, God is bringing an accusation, and he is right in his accusation. God doesn't bring false accusations. That's the way I would go there. But then you've got what the charge itself is from verses 3 to 5, I think. So, oh my people, what have I done to you? How have I wearied you? Answer me. And then he says, this is what I've done for you, that in order, so he recounts some of the Exodus material, got them into the promised land in Gilgal in verse 5, in order to know the righteous acts of Yahweh. They've received so much, they've been given so much, they've been rescued by the Lord, and now they seem to be complaining that God has wearied them and that they're fed up of him and they want to do things without him. It's just extraordinary.
So going to verse 3, is that, I was taking it as sarcasm from God's part. How have I wearied you? Well, obviously I haven't. Like, I've done all this stuff for you. No way you could say I'm wearied. But then you might read it as he's picking up on something that they might have said. Or thought.
Yes, it's at least possible. I think it's the charges, I would say, being implied here rather than stated. But the fact that, this is one of the things that we touched on a little bit in our last episode, trying to understand what the context is that they're writing in. What I don't think we said in the last episode, but a key question to ask is, what's the particular issue that the prophet is facing? And there we have to read between the lines to work out what are the particular issues that they're focusing on in the people that they're addressing. And the fact that this question is being raised here, what have I done to you? How have I wearied you? It seems to me that implies that they are feeling that they are resentful of God in some way, or that they're fed up of being God's people, want to be some other God's people. Fairly familiar practice of the people of Israel and Judah to start worshipping other gods. So I think that's the kind of thing that's being implied. Do you think that makes sense?
Yeah, sure.
And just what is verse 5? What is that referring to when he's saying, remember what Balak, king of Moab?
So this is on the plains of Moab, where they're heading towards the promised land. They're getting towards the end of their wilderness wanderings. Balak wanted to stop them and was threatened by them. There's this vast number of people coming. And so he sent for this prophet or seer, Balaam, the son of Beor, who seems to have had some kind of an international reputation for being a prophet. He could be a prophet for hire who would come and curse the people he wanted to curse. So they sent for him, and there's this brilliantly funny story of him saying, I'm not going to go. And then the Lord says, go with the people, and then gets in trouble for doing so. And he has a talking donkey and an angel standing in the way, and he's been recruited to announce curses on, and all he can do is announce blessings on the people of Israel. So it's a great story. So there's that incident that Balak is trying to stop the people getting any further, and Balaam is unable to do anything other. He cannot curse. He can only announce God's blessing. And then from Shittim, or the Acacia Grove, to Gilgal. Shittim is one side of the Jordan where they camp before they cross the Jordan. Gilgal is the place where they camp on the other side of the Jordan, having first entered the land in Joshua 4.
Okay, so just more examples of God helping his people and providing for them.
And he's done that so that they may know the righteous acts of Yahweh. And that's not just know in an intellectual sense, that's deeply experience.
And then verse 6 to 8, who's speaking there? Is this still the Lord speaking, or?
These are very intriguing verses. So I think what we have in 6 and 7 is the defense. So I'm looking at my translation here rather than the Christian Standard Bible that I was looking at just now. And I've put this into speech marks because I think that people are saying, well, what shall I do? With what shall I come before Yahweh and bow myself before God on high? So shall I come with burnt offerings, with year-old calves? But the implication is that the people think that Yahweh is not going to be pleased. The Lord won't be pleased with that. Will the Lord be pleased with thousands of rams, with 10,000 rivers of oil? Can you ever please this God? He's just so demanding. Shall I give my firstborn for my transgression, the fruit of my body for the sin of my soul? So I think there's this sense of the people feel are complaining that the demands that God has put on them are just impossible for them to keep. That they can never do enough to please him, which just shows how little they understand, as Micah will go on to show us in a moment.
So one of the things I think that happens that makes prophecy a little bit harder to understand is normally when you're reading an Old Testament prose narrative, it will tell you when there's a change of speaker. It's very simple. Change of speaker, so-and-so, so-and-so, and it's just very simple. Prophets missed out all the time, and that's one of the features. And in a lot of ways, it's a bit like rap today, where the references within rap, part of the attraction of it is that it's not totally all on the surface. It's not too obvious. You actually have to get into the lingo in order to get out the goods. And that's a feature of it. And so what I think you've got here is, a different speaker in verse 6 and 7 from what we're going to have in verse 8, and a different voice, let's say. And and the fact that goes on unannounced, or a lot of time in the prophets, they miss out. They use pronouns, but they won't tell you who they refer to. So normally in a prose text, you say, you name the characters, and the pronouns are only used when they're definitely who they're referring back to. That's not the territory we're in. So it's again a bit like an advanced crossword. It's deliberately more tricky. That's part of it, but it draws you in. I mean, like people do Sudoku, they don't want the numbers already in there. They want actually to be made to do some work, because when you have to do the work to understand, you learn better. And so there's a teaching method to this. Now, I love Tony's take on this, that it's just the question in verse 7 is so over the top in terms of, is this what you need to come? And then we've got a wonderful contrast in verse 8.
Yeah. So then we've got this, as you say, the big contrast. We've got now the basis for God's judgment, because so verse 4 and 5, that reference back to the covenant, that's calling on them to remember that God has rescued them, that remember who they are, remember the kind of relationship they have in God. All they can think about are these elaborate, over-the-top rituals. So we have to push buttons in order to placate God, and they've lost sight of the relationship. And verse 8 just flips that back around and says, he has told you, mankind, he has told you, human, what is good. And what does the Lord require of you? But to practice justice, to love faithful kindness, and to walk humbly with your God. This is, we said in the last episode, I think this is a great summary of the whole of the Torah's teaching. It is about acting in the right way before God, to relate to others rightly. So I think we talked in one of the earlier episodes of the 4 relational dimensions of shalom that I think that the prophets are invoking all the time. And the key one, the relationship with God, the relationship with other people, is also absolutely crucial. It comes out of having a right relationship with God. We relate to others well. We relate to the world around us, the environment properly, and we relate to ourselves well. So everything gets in balance when everything is, when you have this state of shalom, when you are living what the Lord requires of you. And so there's these 3 things, this summarizing of the law. This is relational. It's relational with God. It's relational with each other. And it's not about just doing rituals for the sake of scoring points, which is what they seem to be suggesting.
I think for me, it's very interesting in terms of just if I can say, the history of religion, or the history of thought, if you like, because it's very clearly in the Old Testament that sacrifice of animals is relativized. Because what you got in verse 6, where it says, shall I come before him with burnt offerings and calves a year old? That's all stuff that you could find in the law. In the next verse, shall I give my firstborn for my transgression? That's, human sacrifice. That's not going to be found in the law, though you could find it in some surrounding cultures. But whichever way it is, that's not where the focus is. The focus is actually on this attitudinal thing, which for me fits amazingly well with the New Testament in terms of, a Christian reading, where obviously people could misread it as saying, well, it's all about, good works and your own attitude. And, we'd say, no, it is the sacrifice of Christ which enables us to approach God. But on that basis, then all of these animal sacrifices aren't actually what get you to God. They're something which help you recognize the necessity of some greater sacrifice. They're pointing beyond themselves. And so there's this wonderful way in which I think the book of Micah lifts us above the material world, as it does. We're looking last session in the way the temple is pointing to God's space beyond the earthly temple. And I think you've got the same going on with this. And I think it's so important to get that over to people. Yeah,
that's really helpful. And of course, the in a sense, the irony of verse 7 is, they're saying, should I give my firstborn for my transgression, the offspring of my body for my own soul? No, of course not. But the Lord
That is
gives,
what God
gives his
did,
firstborn for their transgression, and that's just extraordinary. So that these phrases that often translated in fairly similar ways, but acting justly or practicing justice. So mishpat is the Hebrew word. It's generally referring to right social relationships. You can see lots of it in Exodus 20 to 23, the early part of the covenant, the Ten Commandments and onwards. But it can also refer to judgments or the ordinances that God has given. So you could understand this as practicing the things that God has set out in his mishpats, in his ordinances, in his commands, but probably in terms of relationships, because, as I say, this word mishpat generally refers to rightness within social relationships. And then the loving faithfulness or love faithful kindness, wonderful, wonderful Hebrew word, chesed, which is never good for a microphone, is it, when you have to get that ch sound? But it's got ideas of love and goodness and faithfulness and kindness and loyal love, loving kindness. It's beautiful, rich word, and we are to love that kind of love, that kind of faithful kindness, and then to walk humbly or wisely. The word could be more on the wisdom side. Bruce Walker suggests it's more along those lines. But walk humbly with God. This is the essence of discipleship, whether it's Old Testament discipleship or New Testament discipleship. To walk with God, to live God's ways, and to love the deep, faithful, loyal love that the Lord himself expresses. It's no wonder that this is one of the best known verses, not just in Micah, but in the Old Testament. Yep. But here it is in the middle of this lawsuit, this covenant lawsuit, because these people have lost sight of this. They are not living in a relationship with God. They want just to press these ritual buttons. And Micah is saying, this is what it's all about. But then he's not finished, of course, because then we get into into a further set of accusations. He's then just going to open this up a little bit in verses 9 to 12. So the voice of Yahweh proclaims to the city, it's sound wisdom to fear your name. Really difficult phrase to translate. What does English Standard Version have?
Is sound wisdom to fear your name?
Yeah. Which I think is pretty good. But you'll find so many variations in the.
I mean, what I'm struck by is how verses 9 to 16 are so much less well known.
Yeah, absolutely.
I'm looking through them, and there's hardly a well-known phrase in this. I mean, maybe Statutes of Omri or something, but that's. It's not a well-known passage, and so my challenge is, you're probably going to take us through it, but how you do that, how you help people benefit from this,
and the fact that the translations do different things with the end of verse 9 actually can create a bit of a stumbling block, because if you're trying to study carefully, you'll often will study with two translations. And you go, oh, hang on, well, which is it? Is it list no tribe and him who appointed it, or is it pay attention to the rod and the one who ordained it? So
the word is rod or tribe.
Yeah,
and of course. I haven't got the Hebrew in front of me, but I can think what word it would be in Hebrew, which would come out as both.
Yeah.
And that's...
and they both make sense in different ways.
They both make sense, isn't it? And it could be both are meant, I suppose.
So when you get to that kind of thing, there are times if you don't have any Hebrew and you don't know that the word can work in those different ways, there are times when we just have to say, okay, clearly this Hebrew is difficult. We move on. We can't get. We need to try to understand as best we can with the text that we have, and ask the Lord for further illumination and consult the commentaries, try to see if there are any answers. But actually, we can get so bogged down in trying to make sense of one particular little phrase that we then lose sight of the bigger picture. So
Yes, and I think the thing about it is that with two translations, I think it would be good for someone who doesn't know Hebrew to assume that they're both correct. Or that they could both be correct. They may differ, but not to think that they have to be opposed to each other. I mean, and you can think in the Old Testament about how, say, Aaron's rod budded and things like this, that often a rod can stand for a family group as well.
Yes.
So it shouldn't be too surprising that rod and tribe might align. So there might be ways in which, even just working from English translations, you could say, oh no, these are not just totally opposite. They are actually somehow aligning. Maybe there's a deeper meaning. Now, my tendency is to want to have my cake and eat it. So that's why I like to have two meanings and then I don't have to choose. It's a bit like, got a menu and think I'd like to have both of those main courses, but I know I can't fit both. So that's slightly just a temperamental thing to do with how decisive one is. But I still think it can be helpful for people to say, I don't necessarily have to say that translation's wrong. They could both be getting at something.
They are both getting at something. I think,
and they could both be representing something of the correctly of the thought of the author. Divine and human.
So it is. It is really helpful to be working with more than one translation if you can't do it in Hebrew, which most of us can't. So we're still in further accusations. Verse 10, can I forget any longer the treasures of wickedness in the house of the wicked? It's not immediately obvious, but probably the idea is that that Judah is the house of the wicked, and they have accumulated stuff because of their wickedness. So they've made themselves wealthy. There's other stuff within Micah that suggests that there's quite a bit of wealth around, but also a lot of inequality within the society. So some people have accumulated treasures of wickedness, and is God going to put that on one side, or can he forget it?
And that sort of makes sense in light of what follows, because what follows is all sorts of injustice and cheating that's going on. So perhaps in one sense, it's sort of anticipating what's about to come up.
Yeah. So short measures, people with wicked scales, deceptive weights. These are all examples of injustice perpetrated by powerful people against weak people, rich people against poor people. Always, doesn't work the other way, does it? And the Lord is saying, that's not the way you're to live, because it's not consistent with the Torah.
Should we talk about just the practicalities of that? So, I mean, someone comes along and says, I want a shekel of something, or whatever the weight is, an ephah, and you just say, well, look, here's my weight, but it's actually a cheating one, and you've managed to shortchange people, and you can do that all the time because people aren't. People don't have coins at this stage, so they might be giving you valuable metal in exchange for food or whatever it is. And there are just all sorts of ways to cheat the system there, just slightly. I mean, it's like...
and there's no Bureau of Weights and Measures with a standardized, well, there's a temple shekel, but nobody has access to that.
This is why it talks about that quite a bit in the Old Testament in terms of cheating, and it seems that's going on.
And
so then verse 13 to 16 is the actual verdict.
Yeah, therefore I strike you with a grievous blow. We don't know the nature of what that blow is for a moment.
That would go with a rod.
Yep. Yes, of course it would. Absolutely. Yeah. Making you desolate because of your sins. And then this idea of, you'll eat, but you're not going to be satisfied. There should be emptiness within your inner parts. It may suggest dysentery, not a most pleasant image. But the prophets are very happy to use imagery that's not very pleasant. Ezekiel in particular uses a pretty shocking stuff.
We don't need to go into all of it right now,
you're not satisfied because you've got dysentery. You'll put stuff away, but you're not going to save it. And if you do manage to save something, that's going to go to the sword. You're going to be able to sow, but you won't harvest. So you can do all of this stuff. You're not going to benefit from your injustice. You've been using these short measures, deceptive weights. You've planted all this stuff, but because you've practiced oppression and injustice, you are not going to benefit. You are going to face judgment. And why have they done that? Because they haven't kept God's law. They've kept the statutes of Omri. Verse 16, Omri was one of the evil kings of the northern kingdom. Ahab then is mentioned also in verse 16. He came just slightly later from the same dynasty. So previous century we're looking back to here. But you've walked their ways. You've walked in their counsels. You have not. Implication is you have not walked in God's. You've not kept God's statutes. You've not practiced God's deeds. You've not walked in God's counsels. You've been forgetting all of that stuff, and so you are now going to face desolation. I will give you over to desolation, your inhabitants to hissing. You shall bear the scorn of my people. And that's a fascinating final phrase, because the Lord is speaking to his people and saying, I'm bringing judgment, and saying, you shall bear the scorn of my people. So who is doing the scorning? Or is he meaning that the people are to be carrying the scorn? But again, who is doing the scorning? Is God doing the scorning, or is it God's faithful people who will scorn those who are judged?
Well, that brings me on to my next question, actually, which was coming on to the third aspect of looking at the book, which was the audience, and the audience who he's writing to or speaking to.
Yeah.
Is it a particular group of bad people? Is it meant to be the whole nation?
Both. I think in a sense it is, I mean, certainly this passage, there is a sense in which this is being targeted to the wealthy and the powerful and the unjust. And they are the particularly problematic part of society, but it is the society as a whole that's gone astray. From top to bottom, it seems that the whole nation has become corrupt. They're all under God's judgment, but there are the wealthy, powerful elite who are particularly in the firing line. Anything to add on that, Pete?
No, I mean, I just think that the book is written to move a whole number of people closer to God. I mean,
yes.
So I'm just looking on at the ending, who's a pardoning God like you. He will again have compassion on us. And even talking there about the remnant of God's people. So there, in a sense, there's the people that God covenants with, but some of them break the covenant, and then there's a remnant within those, but then there's also all readers of all time later.
Yes.
And God, when he has a book like this become part of his scripture, has that wider thought. And that's why I think you can come at this from a number of different circumstances and find it's speaking and drawing you close to God.
Yeah. So it challenges the powerful and the wealthy and the who are oppressing. It encourages those who are faithful to God, that they are living the right way. They are practicing justice, and they are loving this faithful kindness. They are walking humbly with God, and those who are doing that are encouraged by this, because they see that God is not condoning the wickedness and is bringing them to account. And so there's that immediate audience that are listening to Micah, that are both challenged and rebuked. But then this is all going on. Micah is speaking before the destruction of probably this section is still before the destruction of the northern kingdom of Israel, but it is. and maybe before the attack on Jerusalem in 701 by the Assyrians as well, certainly before that. So he's saying to these people, this is what's going to happen. And then within their lifetime, they will witness this terrible thing going on. And they will say, God has been proved right in his judgment. He is true to his word. But then this book is then incorporated into this scroll of the 12, and down through the years it is preserved and read, and future generations of people read this and are challenged in exactly the same way. And here we are 27 centuries later on, and we still have it, and it still speaks to us. And we read it in new ways because we are reading this side of the cross, and we see more of the Lord's mercy. We also see more of the Lord's judgment. But we are also encouraged and challenged in exactly the same ways, but in a radically different context. But we can talk in more detail about that in another episode, perhaps.
Okay, great. Cool. Well, we'll draw it to a close there. Thank you both. Thanks for joining us. Please do rate and review. Let us know what you're thinking in the comments. Any questions you've got, please do put them in the comments. And yeah, please do subscribe so you don't miss the next episode.